I'm Alan Mortis, and this is Think Radio Presents Think Business. My guest today is co-working space guru Josh Freed.
The internet enabled a whole lot. The act of connecting people has enabled a lot. For proximity, the act of connecting people to physical spaces, we think we're going to be enabling some really great opportunities for people to advance.
Welcome to another great conversation on Think Radio.
Think Business is made possible by funding from the ICE Lab at Western, supporting innovative business in the rural Southwest.
If you like Think Business, then I know you'll enjoy the other shows in the Think Radio Presents family of podcasts. Think People, a celebration of just how amazing people can be. Think Planet, conversations with thought leaders on important environmental issues. Subscribe to Think Radio Presents on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever else you get great content. And don't forget to help us spread the word by liking our social media channels and sharing the content we post. We're grateful to have you in the conversation on Think Radio Presents. Freed is the CEO and co-founder of Proximity Space, a company with a very simple mission: to make life easier for freelancers, entrepreneurs, creatives, and innovators who don't fit the traditional workplace mold and who are looking for new ways and new places to do business. These days, that's a rapidly growing segment of the workforce. It's estimated that by 2027, for instance, a majority of workers in the U.S. will belong in one way or another to the freelance economy. That's an astonishing growth. And millennials are leading the way, with 47% of those expected to be participants in the freelance economy themselves. Josh and his team offer a wide range of management services to more than 200 co-working spaces around the world, and including managing co-working spaces of their own. The story about how he got into this business and what he sees on the economic horizon is a fascinating one, and I'm glad to have Josh with me today. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, Josh, I've actually been working out of co-working spaces for many, many years. We just called them coffee shops.
Sure. Yep.
So what's up? How did the coffee shop become something that is an industry in its own right?
Well, I think it's that pendulum swinging, right? So coffee shops, Rotary clubs, libraries, schools. This idea of collective working isn't new. It really comes more along the lines of this is the adaptation of what happens when too many people decide that this is what they want, and it starts to overtake all of those assets, all of those spaces. Coffee shops start putting up signs that say, no laptop parking, minimum 2 cups of coffee to sit here. But really what co-working is meant to do is it's just meant to allow those working inside of it to find what they need throughout the day, to connect to others, and really just to make it a little bit easier for the day-to-day of your professional life to somewhat start to mirror the day-to-day of your personal life, which is you work as long as you need to, you interact with the people that you want to interact with, and then you go about your day. So co-working at this point is really just us as individuals saying this is what we need, and the industry is adopting it.
Well, so give us an idea of who is a typical candidate for belonging to a co-work space. Who profits from this most?
You would think that it's always going to be the millennial, right? It's going to be the one that just has a non-traditional sense of workplace and work-life balance. Turns out, running a big network like we do and being able to interact with so many co-working spaces, there's one thing that we can tell you about the co-working industry, and there is no traditional profile of a co-working space member. There's not. There is the 18-year-old, there is the high schooler, there is the 65-year-old, there is the male, female, freelancer, worker for a private corporation, there is government workers, there's nonprofits. It's all over the board.
Well, it kind of makes sense because really we're talking about people with some innovative idea that doesn't quite fit the mold. Well, those can strike anyone.
Yeah.
Right?
I think there is this thought process that there will always be this, these are the entrepreneurs, these are the startups, that's what's inside these spaces. It turns out that's actually not true.
Really?
They are in the spaces, they are represented, but by and large, these are people that work for other companies that it is closer to go to your co-working space. There's some new studies that are out there that show something like 63% of the workforce, which is a massive number, is already capable of working up to 1 day a week out of a kind of a location-neutral facility, meaning a co-working space or a coffee shop or their house. So it's not this innovative startup entrepreneur mentality. They're in there, but it's really just it's anybody who is looking for a change to their work-life balance, a change to their work scenery, kind of their work environment.
Sure.
Or it's just out of convenience. Something as simple as the co-working space is closer than my home office.
Yeah.
Or to my home base.
Yeah. It cuts down the commute and so
Correct.
forth.
Yeah. Or because I'm going to be downtown or I'm going to be in that part of town, it's easier for me to go pop in, have a couple hours, have a meeting, and then keep moving. It's really just not as simple as just saying these are innovative spaces. They are, but they are so much more. I liken it to these assets that are inside of communities at this point are nothing more than a library. They're nothing more than a community garden. These are gathering places, and that's why they're so popular in all different sizes of communities.
Well, that brings up an interesting point because it's not just a chair to sit in and a desk to work at. Co-work spaces have really evolved into incubators.
Sure.
So even if I do work for a company and I'm there because I don't want the commute today or whatever my reason, I'm surrounded by other people doing similar things. And just by being there, we're meeting each other. We're saying, hey, what are you up to? Oh, well, I happen to need that service. And do you find that this is true, that a co-working space really becomes more than the sum of the parts?
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of touching on what would be what I would define as more like the community and the energy that is associated with the space. So you have the community aspect of just being in close proximity to each other is a reason for the naming, right? Creates a lot of opportunity. Hearing what others are working on, interacting and having conversations. It's kind of that water cooler effect that you learn more, right?
Sure.
But then there's the other side of why are people more productive in environments that are busy? You would think that this secluded quiet would be the productive, but it's not.
I know that for a fact.
That's why coffee shops are popular because there's a lot of energy that's going around. And that energy kind of going around you, seeing people busy, actually speeds you up, right? It makes you want to work more. So I think that just naturally opportunities come out of co-working spaces because you're around others who are busy. And you see that. You want to know what people are doing, but also it kind of pushes you forward. So that little inkling that you had in the back of your head that says, I wanted to do something. I may work for this other company, but I want to do something on the side, kind of gets drawn out of you because you can't help it. You want to participate in this kind of energy that's in the space.
Well, and that's not something that's impossible sitting at your kitchen table at home.
No, of course not.
But it's not very likely.
Well, I mean,
I know myself when I'm sitting at home, there are 80 things that distract me from what I need to do today.
Sure.
Which is just less likely in a co-working space. Do you find that to be true?
I do. I mean, look, we all work from a space that makes sense to you at that moment. There are spaces that have different zones within the facility, lighting, a sense of smells that are going on, soft seating versus fixed seating, sit stands, different zones within a space to match where you're at that moment, not just even that day, but that moment.
Right.
Some of us can be very productive sitting at your kitchen table. You get into a zone and all of a sudden you realize it's noon and you haven't even put on pants yet.
Yeah.
That happens. But then there's some of those days where you try to sit down to work and you just have these sparks that are flying all over of all the other things you needed to do. You need to take the trash out. You need to do the dishes. You needed to go run this errand. That happens.
Exactly.
Co-working spaces tend to still give you that place where when I walk through these doors, I'm working or I'm doing something besides my normal life. And I think that's important, especially when you start talking about that work-life balance, that when you're working from home offices are great, right? But it's hard to draw that distinction between am I home or am I working? And I think that going to a co-working space still does provide you that sense of barrier you walk through that says, I'm now working. And when you leave, I'm now leaving.
Sure, it's a psychological threshold
Sure.
that can be very valuable. Well, a lot of people may be hearing about co-working spaces for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're not freelancers, but this is intriguing to them. And the first question they're going to ask is, okay, but how much does this cost me every month?
Sure. Yeah.
This is an affordable model, though.
It is. Yeah. I mean, it's a community model, right? So it's kind of the shared asset. It's why flexible offices, shared offices, it's the idea of taking an asset that would typically be expensive for somebody to have on their own and dividing it up amongst a group.
Mm-hmm. It's a co-op.
It is. And this has been done time and time again within, I mean, you're talking about large apartment buildings. That's all you're doing is co-oping living at that point, right? But co-working is not only an affordable way for new businesses to get started because it takes down their barrier of entry, it also is an affordable place for freelancers to have that sense of place without having to have all of the expense that goes along with it. Mm-hmm. You know, you're talking about most co-working spaces have very flexible models, everything from a drop-in, use it whenever you want to a flexible, bring your laptop in, take it away with you, to that 24-hour, this is your space, and then all the way up, of course, into the offices. It also gives you access to assets that are very expensive and usually not high priority. Conference facilities. Conference facilities are very expensive, and they're rarely used by one person that often. So it's not typically a piece of asset that you would build. Having a few conference rooms, having those phone booths, having those day offices, those are things that as a group you share, but individually you would not have those assets on your own. Conference facilities tend to be that great wasted asset, right? Because they typically sit empty for quite a long stretch. In a co-working space, they stay busy because there's a lot of people trying to use it.
Sure. And what a value that adds to a small business to be able to bring in several clients at once and take care of a meeting in a very professional setting. Well, and that extends to things like copy machines, internet access,
coffee. I mean, it's all those things that
sofas that are sitting in the sun for a nice nap in the afternoon. No, I didn't say that.
No, it is. What you're touching on is the idea that most people either get into business or are in their kind of work balance right now. And it is not to go out and build a fancy office. It is not to go out and try to secure a downtown location. Mm-hmm. Rarely do those businesses need that asset except to have access to their customers. Mm-hmm. Co-working spaces can give you that, but then they give you so much more. They give you access to a shared workspace. They give you access to a community of other people. They give you access to other members that might be doing businesses that are complementary to yours that you would have to go source out elsewhere, but you can meet them over a cup of coffee while you're waiting for your next meeting.
Well, what if I'm one of those people that is most productive at midnight?
Sure. 24-hour. That's that. You know, what's actually funny is if you look at co-working spaces, the flexible models within co-working spaces, there are just as many nights and weekends warriors as there are daytime. You have a lot of, let's say, your coding bases, those employees that are working on code that will work at night. Just for whatever reason, that's when they're the most productive. It's one of the things that Proximity really focused on was how do you get people efficiently in a space 24 hours a day online and secure the facility and provide a safe environment for the member. And how can you do that? And that's one thing that we championed behind. We needed to make this a part of the Proximity platform is 24-hour access.
Well, and so that's an interesting part of your story because you didn't start with Proximity and all the services that you're describing there of how to make access possible. You started with a co-work space.
Correct.
And Proximity grew out of the fact that you couldn't find anybody to do this for you.
Correct.
So you actually met your own need.
The best stories are the ones, the problems you fix for yourself.
Take us through that. How did that evolve?
Yeah, so we started our first co-working space in Montrose, Colorado, and that was a partnership between Proximity and the city of Montrose to bring a co-working space downtown. Downtown Montrose definitely needed some revitalizing, needed some more energy brought into it, and the co-working space produces a tremendous amount of foot traffic, and it's great for downtown, so, as well as for other parts of the city. When we first started, the downside of opening a co-working space is the actual running of a co-working space. It's not as easy as everybody thinks. It's always fun to say, hey, I own a co-working space.
Just unlock the doors and let people do their thing, right?
Until you're the one cleaning the toilets and trying to figure out how to unlock those doors and do all those things. What we discovered about 6 months into running the first location is that the industry was really founded on a lot of digital duct tape. It was founded on several software solutions, a few hardware solutions that none of them actually talked to each other. You had to kind of bridge the databases between them. You had to use certain API tools to get them to talk to each other. And what it ended up with is I distinctly remember standing in our new co-working space, which only had a handful of members because you just opened, and you have a very expensive hardware and software solution for a very small handful of people. And it didn't make any sense.
Right.
So we started to develop a solution just for us. Well, that kind of parlayed into a few other spaces saying, hey, what is it that you're using to make this happen? Can we try that? It doesn't take too long before you start figuring out maybe this is a problem, and maybe we should try to solve that.
Well, and it's the classic startup philosophy. Find what's broken and fix it, and they'll come to you.
Yep.
And you found that was true.
We did. We also found that the industry was kind of being fed an idea that wasn't correct. And Proximity has enough audacity to say that we'll fix this. Co-working was not meant to be this siloed membership, kind of like a gym model, though that was its foundation. Because it makes a lot of sense that you have your individual space, you have your members, and that's what you need to function. But co-working is about so much more than that. It's about connection to each other, connection to other spaces, to get connection to other resources.
Resources like what?
Like job networks, like relocation networks, like mentorship, like funding mechanisms, other companies that would be like kind. Because it's serving in an industry that is not one specific industry, it's all of the bases of industry. You just never know what is needed for that whole community to work. And those community resources need to connect to each other. So what Proximity did from the ground up was actually create the infrastructure to be a connected community. So each one of the co-working spaces that use Proximity are actually connected together. You, as a member of one, can travel to the other ones. You can see things that are coming up for events across the country. You can travel to a new area, check out what the co-working spaces are doing, and actually join them for a week or join them for a day. It's meant to, if you look at any one of our business cards, this is always fun. Nowhere on our business card does it say creating the world's greatest co-working space software, though we are. It actually says connecting the world's mobile workforce. The point behind Proximity is that the workforce is changing, and our job is to connect them together, both to each other and to the spaces that they are going to be using. That's our actual mission.
So co-working space then really isn't limited to whatever square footage you've rented in downtown Montrose or wherever it is. This is a cyberspace that you're creating.
Correct. Yeah, this is a where do you need to work today? This is a play on, is it in a hotel lobby? Is it in a coffee shop? Is it in a co-working space, or is it just in a conference facility? Is it at a hotel? It could be. The fact is that these spaces where people need to work just need to be connected and activated. And then you need to just make them available. And that's how the workforce will interact with it. We have pilots going with retail organizations. We have pilots going with hotels. We have pilots going with coffee shops, because the goal is to actually just make them available and get out of the way. Let the workers use what they're trying to do, what they're trying to anyways, and they're going to.
So speak to me on a macro level for just a minute. Okay, we've talked about the benefit of all of this to an individual worker or a team in whatever industry. What does this mean for the economy at large? I mean, these are big shifts happening. When you start talking about 50% or more in just a short period of time of people belonging in one way or another to the freelance economy, that's enormous.
It is. And I think there's always some distinction that needs to be drawn between freelance and flexible. There's plenty of studies out there that show that the days of you have a single job as your full-time employment, and that's the one thing you do, are coming to a close. That you're starting to see that the workforce will have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. They may have a side gig. They may have a full-time job plus something else they're working on. They may have a couple part-time jobs. They may be doing what their day job is, but they're working on their evening things. And I think that's because of just how connected as a culture we are now, that we get to learn more about, well, that sounds fun. That sounds interesting. That's a passion I have. That these things would not have typically been exposed to you. You would just be doing what it is you do from 8 to 5, and those days are closing. What I think is going to be interesting about an economy level is that you're going to stop seeing such a requirement for structure and start seeing a whole lot more requirement for flexibility within the workforce. They are going to want, and they are going to need, and they're going to demand more flexibility, more opportunity for change. What that means for actual numbers, I think it's going to be a great time period. I think we're going to see that kind of resurgence of new innovative ideas, new changes of direction for culture, because that exposure to ideas is going to fuel, I guess, the next generation of thinkers.
Well, connect the dots there for me, though. What are you saying? That putting these tools in the hands of innovators and creatives and people who have that second or third job, you say you think that's going to enable some new wave of innovation. What sort of things are on your mind when you say that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I smile because it's exciting to think about what, as humanity, what we can do when we're enabled. Of course, everybody goes to like the Internet of Things, to connected devices, but I really just, this is more just my own opinion at this point, right?
Sure.
But I'm excited to get to watch what people will do when they have the tools in front of them and all that's waiting for is their opinions. I want to know what happens when you have so many opportunities to try something. There should just be enough opportunity to have enough failures, have enough tries, have enough at-bats that all of a sudden something great comes out of the other end. If it's a new technology, if it's a way we communicate with each other, if it's a way we transport each other around. I don't know what the next idea is going to be, but I do know that the internet enabled a whole lot. The act of connecting people has enabled a lot. For proximity, the act of connecting people to physical spaces, we think we're going to be enabling some really great opportunities for people to advance.
Well, you can count on humans,
right?
Yeah. To be creative when given the opportunity. Do you think there's sort of a reverse effect happening? Is progress in a co-working space and this sort of philosophy of dispersion, is that starting to trickle back into the corporate environment? Are corporate environments changing to more reflect this kind of flexibility? Yeah,
you have plenty of brands that are already starting to adopt more flexible work environments for their employees. And that's just out of watching culture shift, and hats off to them for doing it. The fact is that if they are reading what their employees need and they're adopting it, great. You always have this pendulum swinging back and forth, right, where we kind of freak out about everybody should be able to work from home, and then you see it kind of back away. Oh, maybe it's not such a good idea that everybody works from home.
Right.
I think what you're going to watch corporates still do is, one, they're trying to figure out what to do with these great, large empires of assets, these buildings they have. And depending on the time period of the economy dictates whether or not those buildings are assets or are they liabilities to them.
Are they full and bustling or are they empty?
And depending on where they are, they can be very expensive assets or very expensive liabilities to them. I think that corporate is going to still allow for a more flexible work environment or more structure depending on what type of employee you are, but then they're still going to allow for this, I don't want to say work-life balance, more like this idea that depending on the employee and depending on what they're doing right now, they may decide that they want to work somewhere else for a little while. They may decide that I'll give you an example. There's a great space in Denver. It's called Catalyst HTI. Massive facility dedicated to healthcare industry. You've got all the big healthcare names that are inside of it, and then a co-working space in there as well too. The whole point of that entire project was to allow for interaction throughout these floors, 7 floors of interaction between businesses, between competitors, between freelancers, and that employees of one business could actually go and work in the co-working space throughout the day or go back to their offices. And it just creates this ability for a community to be formed around a specific industry. This one happens to be healthcare.
Even between competitors.
Wow. So I think that what they're trying to do is they're trying to say, look, we need new innovation in this industry, and the only way we're going to get that is by actually being around each other. We have to come up with ideas together. Hats off to them. They're doing such a great job with it. They're not going to be the only ones. I think you're going to see, you do see it, places like Capital One cafes. The idea that they're trying to take down barriers, that you're not sitting across a table or a teller counter from your banker. You're sitting next to them because they're out there working as well too. I think it's great. I think it's a great idea that they're just trying to take down barriers between people.
So we've already talked about how the internet has enabled a lot of progress already. Do you think it's that the technology here is finally living up to its hype, which we heard about in the early days of the internet, that it was going to democratize so many things that we do? Because that's the word that comes to my mind when you talk about taking down barriers, right? Leveling playing fields. Does it have that potential? Is it that sort of utopian in nature?
I don't know if it's utopian, but I think it's a reality that between the internet and even more so now the mobile computer that's sitting inside everybody's pockets, I think at this point technology is enabling so much. Whether it's caught up to the hype, who knows? We're still,
or ever will.
Or ever will.
But look, this is at least a hopeful sign that it's going in the right direction.
It is, and I think that technology, its main job is infrastructure. It's kind of co-working spaces as well. Their job is infrastructure. The point is to put in the roads, to put in the water pipes, to put in the capability for others to do what they need to do. And I think technology has finally caught up with an infrastructure play. So here's the foundation. Now what do you want to build on top of it? That I think it's caught up with itself.
Well, speaking of infrastructure, how was it that you had the capability to solve this problem that you identified for yourself?
Team. That's the one word that always comes to mind for me is our team.
Yeah.
So we were very fortunate that throughout our endeavors to open spaces, to connect with each other, to build fun things, we came across some really great players. And within the Proximity team, everything that we've built so far has all been in-house. So something that's very rare for a technology company, and we're one of the only few, is that these things are not job shopped out. They are not offshored. They are not sent off to be worked on. These things are done in-house, from the code to the hardware to the marketing to the sales. Everything is in-house. That's helped us move very quickly, and has also helped us solve a lot of problems because we get to taste the problem within our co-working space. We also have been very fortunate that our members of our spaces and those that use our system provide such robust feedback that we know exactly where our customers are at and what they need at all times. So we only develop that is most important to our customers. We don't get kind of distracted and rabbit
You don't have
holed.
to guess.
Yeah, and we're not trying to market fit. At this point, our market tells us exactly what they want.
Yeah.
And we're just obliged to do what they need.
Well, clearly, I mean, you must have had to move your operation to a large, massive city in order to have access to all of this, brain power, right?
Yeah, absolutely not.
No?
No, welcome to work-life balance, right? So we were intentional. We love the western slope of Colorado. No dig against any other part of the country or the world because we have customers all over the place, but we love western Colorado. We live here on purpose. It's not by accident, and it's certainly not easy. But the people that live here, that work here, we were able to kind of call them out of their garages, call them out of their other employment opportunities and into a co-working space and then work with them. We're one of the biggest consumers of talent within the area is the Proximity inside of its co-working spaces. So we have our employees span between our three spaces. We also have been very fortunate that those developers happen to be within the area or willing to move to the area because, hey, the cost of living mixed with the quality of life fit.
Yeah, a lot of people would want to live here on purpose. Yeah. Well, the point of that question and that whole idea is it's possible. You didn't have to bend your process. You've been very successful. You're in 200 co-working spaces around the world. It can be done.
It can be.
So in this case, you're working on co-working spaces. Other entrepreneurs and innovators and people are working on other ideas, and it's in the back of their mind. No, I can't do that here. Your answer is,
It's more like a question back to them. Why?
Yeah.
Is it because of there's usually this thought process that there's access to capital. You need to go to where capital tends to play.
Right.
Turns out that even that capital is starting to push backwards and say, hey, it's very expensive to play in those markets. Why don't you consider where else you could grow that business? Access to talent. Well, does the talent need to be next to you? And if they do, are you somewhere that they would want to be next to you? Where is it that you're living and why are you there?
Right. And let's not assume that the talent isn't there already.
Very true. A fun quick story. Our main engineer, Nathan, was discovered at a startup weekend. sitting on a I'll actually never forget him sitting there working on his computer in a hallway of a hotel for startup weekend, and happened to just show up in Telluride for this startup weekend and had no idea that he was actually in Montrose. And he's now one of the co-founders and our main engineer within Proximity. The guy's brilliant. Just had to get him out of the woodwork and get him to come play.
Yeah.
So I would encourage anybody who is looking to start something to not necessarily fall for the trap that you have to be within only certain areas of the country that are deemed tech hubs. Because the fact of the matter is you are in the town that you are in for a reason. If you want to stay there, you can start your businesses there.
Well, and that's what I'm talking about, that we've enabled, technology has finally enabled this promise that was made, I think, early on, that it was going to do exactly this, democratize, but also sort of disperse opportunity. And your story is a powerful example of that.
We've been enjoying it. It's been a lot of fun.
One last question, because I'm interested to know about you personally.
Sure.
What's your background?
Smorgasbord. It's probably the easiest way to describe it.
You're a what?
Pretty much. So I grew up in Ridgeway. So small town boy, right? Oh. It's also why we have a co-working space there, because I live there now too.
Yeah.
So background came from the actual birthplace Proximity was within a marketing company, so a marketing background. Also did private wealth management, so it gave a pretty decent financial background, and then hospitality before that. So this running of a large staff, this dedication towards the finances of running a company, and then also this push for how do you talk, how do you publicize something, how do you get it out there in the world. My background just happened to hit all the right notes, but I will say that more than anything, it was the act of being able to recognize people that could do a job really well, exceptionally well, for the time period that we're in.
Yeah.
And that's been probably the most success that we've seen, is just how incredible those team members really are, and how quickly they adopted to what we're trying to do.
All right. Josh, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
Awesome conversation, and thanks for all that you're doing. Thanks for watching. Join us next week for another great conversation on Think Radio Presents Think Business.